Welcome, everyone. In today's presentation, I will be speaking about competence to plead guilty. I will also be discussing a critical aspect of criminal law that ensures fairness in the legal system, especially for defendants facing serious charges. So by the end of this presentation, you'll have a solid understanding of what competence to plead guilty means and why it is so important. Okay. Um, Competence to plead guilty refers to a defendant's mental and cognitive ability to understand what pleading guilty means and the consequence of doing so. So, this is essential because a guilty plea carries significant consequences, often resulting in a conviction, a loss of rights, and a sentence. The purpose of assessing competence is to ensure that only those who are mentally capable can make this life altering decision. Why is competence important? It is important because pleading guilty has a major impact on a person's life. Once a plea is entered, the defendant often gives up certain legal rights, like the right to a trial or the right to appeal. A defendant who doesn't fully understand the process might not realize the full impact of their decision. That's why the courts require them to be competent before allowing them to plead guilty. It's about fairness, making sure that the defendants know what they're agreeing to and their plea is informed and voluntary. Legal basis for competence. So the legal foundation for competence comes from the landmark case Dusky versus United States in 1960. So the US Supreme Court established the standard for determining whether a defendant is competent to stand trial. And this same standard applies to pleading guilty. So the court ruled that the defendant must have sufficient present ability to understand the proceeding and to participate in their own defense. This standard helps protect the rights of individuals with mental impairment or cognitive disabilities. So we have the Dusky standard. The Dusky standard requires two things, factual understanding and rational understanding. So the factual understanding means that the defendant knows what's happening in the legal process, what they're being charged with, and what the potential punishment is, and what their legal rights are. As the rational understanding means the defendant can think clearly and make informed decisions, like consulting with their lawyer and making choices that reflect an understanding on their situation. So, together, these two elements ensure that a defendant isn't just passively aware of the legal process, but can actively participate and make decisions. Okay, so application to guilty pleas. So how does this apply to pleading guilty? So the standard for competence to stand trial also applies to competence to plead guilty. So before the defendant can plead guilty, they must understand what pleading guilty means, essentially admitting guilt, further charges against them, know what rights they are giving up. For instance, by pleading guilty, they give up their right to a trial, the right to cross-examine witness, and potentially the right to appeal. So being able to make an informed choice, this means they understand the consequences consequences like the sentence they might receive. A key court case is Godmes versus Morin in 1993. So one key case that clarified this law of competence. So in 1993, the US Supreme Court ruled that the standard for competence to plead guilty is the same as the standard for competent to stand trial. So this means that if the defendant is competent to stand trial, they are also competent to waive their right to a trial and plead guilty. This case is significant because it unified the legal standard for competence, making the system more consistent. Voluntary and informed decisions. So when a defendant pleads guilty, the plea must be voluntary, knowing, and intelligent. So voluntary means the defendant is not being coerced or pressured to making decisions. Knowing means that they fully understand what they're agreeing to, and intelligent refers to the defendant's mental ability to make decisions that are based on a clear understanding of their situation. So the judges play a role here. They must also ask the defendant questions in the court to ensure the plea meets these three requirements. So an example of voluntary informed decision would be the Michelle Blair case. This Detroit woman says she didn't mean to kill her son, but intentionally killed her daughter. Then she told the judge that she doesn't regret any of it. She did plead guilty. She was found competent to stand on trial by the State Forensic Center as well as an independent psychiatric examination. Her attorney said he discussed the plea with Blair at least 3 times. So Legal experts say it's very common for a person to plead guilty to a life offense for going a trial like Blair chose to do. The video will be linked on the description of my YouTube video, so you guys will be able to see that. The psychological assessment of competence. So, in some cases, a psychological evaluation is necessary to determine whether defendant is competent to plead guilty. So, mental health professionals like psychologists or psychiatrists will assess the defendant's cognitive ability and mental state. They'll do evaluation on understanding the charges, whether the defendant understands their charges against them, comprehend the consequences, and has the ability to communicate with their attorney. This process helps the court ensure that the defendant is mentally capable of such significant decision. So, mental illness and competence. So, it is important to note that mental illness alone doesn't automatically make a person incompetent to plead guilty. For instance, let's take Dylan Roof's case. He was diagnosed with a few mental disorders and he had an intellectual disability. But this didn't affect his factual and rational understanding, which is why he was competent to stand trial. So the key question is whether the mental illness impairs the defendant's ability to understand the legal process or make a reasoned decision. For example, a person with severe depression, they might still be able to understand the legal process. However, a person with psychotic disorders who is unable to grasp reality might be considered incompetent. Special consideration plea bargaining is a common part of the legal process where a defendant agrees to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced charge. For a plea bargain to be valid, the defendant must be competent to understand the terms of the deal. This means they need to know what they're giving up, such as the right to a trial. If the defendant is incompetent, they might not be able to make a fully informed choice about whether to accept a plea bargain. Challenges in determining competence. Determining competence can be tricky, especially in borderline cases such as mild cognitive impairments, mental health issues that make it hard to assess their competence. So they might affect competence include like your intellectual disability, severe depression, and schizophrenia. In these cases, the court often relies on expert evaluations to make decisions. So there is court safeguards. The court uses several safeguards to ensure if the defendant is competent to plead guilty. Judges play a crucial role in this process. Before accepting a guilty plea, the judge will ask the defendant a series of questions like whether they understand the charges, whether they understand the rights they're giving up. It helps protect the defendants from making decisions they don't fully understand. So we do have ethical concerns around competence to plead guilty. If a defendant who is not competent is allowed to plead guilty, it undermines the fairness of the legal system. So if an attorney suspects their client is not competent, they are required to raise the issue in court to ensure their client's rights and are protected. So this is ethical responsibility is a key to maintaining the justice in the legal process. In conclusion, so competence to plead guilty is critical concept in ensuring the defendants are treated fairly in the legal system. So it protects the individuals from making uniform decisions that could negatively affect their lives. So yeah, thank you for watching my presentation. This is a discussion question that I'll be leaving you with is how is competency related to entering a guilty plea, waiving the right to an attorney, or being executed? Give an example on how it's related and explain your reasoning behind your response. Thank you.